The Ukraine war in the heart of Europe has affected the whole world economically, politically, and militarily for 14 months. Although Ukraine currently holds the upper hand in the war, the Western states' economic sanctions against Russia and Russia's cutting off of oil and gas caused major crises around the world. For this reason, while the rest of the world fears the outbreak of another war, their fear is about to happen to them in the South Pacific. Long before the Russia-Ukraine tension, the tension between China and Taiwan has reached its climax. Both countries continue their preparations as a war may break out at any moment, and the rest of the world looks at these preparations with concern. Today, we will give you information about what may happen in a possible China-Taiwan war. Let's examine the developments in the China-Taiwan conflict and the information about the consequences of a possible war together. The Taiwanese military recently conducted a massive monthly live-fire exercise amid heightened regional tensions ahead of a feared Chinese offensive. The island's defense command oversaw the Xinjiang exercises, and the soldiers were deployed using guns to fire at targets in a variety of scenarios to maintain combat readiness. The exercise started with the firing of M114 and M101 howitzers and 120mm mortars. The troops then fired the machine guns, after which the tanks attacked the beach and destroyed the simulated enemy force. Finally, the troops carried out a counterattack operation to prevent the simulated enemy from reaching the beach. Penghu Defense Command has declared that its units will continue to carry out their duties and adhere to the principles of combat readiness, but responding to conflict rather than actively avoiding conflict. According to Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Taiwan is investing heavily in defense capabilities to counter the serious threat posed by the Chinese military. As Taiwan prepares for a possible attack at any moment, the ministry highlighted 2027 as a year of special concern. It was stated that the reason for this was that China aimed to be fully prepared for a military attack by that year. Taiwan takes the Chinese military threat very seriously. That's why they invested more in their own defensive capabilities. However, Taiwan does not focus on a single timeline and expects an attack from China between 2025 and 2027. Some experts are touting it as 2035 and beyond, and the Taiwanese government takes any assessment very seriously. What Taiwan wants to be prepared for is to be ready whenever China launches its military attack on Taiwan. But experts draw particular attention to the year 2027. So why do experts point to the year 2027? President Xi Jinping may want to launch a crisis against Taiwan to demonstrate his ability and desire to act for China's unification, potentially stemming from domestic problems such as a slowing economy, financial instability, and discontent from the COVID lockdowns. First, China has already announced that it will be militarily ready by 2027, and this will also be the year Xi Jinping enters his fourth term. If Xi Jinping can't tell the Chinese people that he has accomplished something in the first and third terms, he may want to start a crisis against Taiwan to show the Chinese people that he has a desire. China can create an external crisis to distract attention from its internal problems. According to Western officials, the Chinese economy is slowing down and the Chinese people do not seem happy at all. Following the contentious meeting of Taiwan's leader, Tsai Ing-wen and Kevin McCarthy in California, the Chinese aircraft carrier Shandong and the U.S. carrier USS Nimitz came within 400 nautical miles off the coast of Taiwan. This distance is equal to a stone's throw, and this dangerous rapprochement may be directly related to the interview in the USA. While war is not inevitable, the possibility of conflict between Beijing and Taipei continues to increase, and with it, the possibility that the United States, through miscalculation, error, or mishap, will enter an open conflict with nuclear-armed China. The consequences of even a conventional conflict with China could severely damage the U.S. Pacific Air Force and Navy, no matter which side wins. So what can happen in an attack situation? In the event of a Chinese attack, it is generally considered unlikely that the Taiwanese will survive long enough for the United States to intervene. However, a careful analysis of the combat fundamentals in the game shows that Taipei is unlikely to survive an all-out attack by the Chinese People's Liberation Army. Many experts in the West point to the war between Russia and Ukraine, claiming that it has left China hesitant to launch a military operation to seize Taiwan. At the very least, it is likely that China has studied this war and has learned lessons from Russia's war in Ukraine that will improve China's chances. A careful examination of the conditions between Beijing and Taipei reveals that in some categories, China's attempt to forcibly take Taiwan was less compelling than Russia's attempt to conquer Ukraine. To be clear at the outset, there is no guarantee that China will be successful in capturing Taiwan because China has enormous challenges to overcome. A lot of things can go wrong for Beijing and everything can work for Taipei. It's equally clear that key military bases are giving a strong advantage to Chinese leader Xi Jinping's forces and working against Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen. So is the Ukraine war the right example for the Sino-Taiwan conflict? In the Russia-Ukraine war, the Ukrainian armed forces fought fiercely and exceeded expectations. Before the outbreak of all-out war, Ukrainian army had fought a civil war, mainly in the separatist eastern part of Ukraine for 8 long years. Ukrainians, especially those living in the western parts of the country, have held strong anti-Russian views for many years. When Putin's forces attacked Ukraine in February 2022, they encountered a battle-tested Ukrainian army and a public that was fiercely opposed to Russia. Conversely, none of these dynamics will come into play if China invades Taiwan. Officially, Taiwan has an active force of 180,000 and more than 2 million reserve troops. Still, not only are these units not engaged in years of active combat, their training is sparse and of poor quality. Some of Taiwan's frontline active units have a staggering 60% human population. Conscripts are only required to serve a 4-month period of compulsory military service. During this time, soldiers receive little more than the basics of how to fire a weapon, but hardly any training in how to fight. By the way, Taiwanese people don't hate the Chinese because of their Hong Kong experience. A strong majority of Taiwanese citizens do not want to unite with China, but Taiwan's opposition is to the form of government, not the Chinese people. The vast majority of the people somehow want to avoid war with China. Therefore, if a war breaks out, the Chinese army is faced with an inexperienced, poorly trained and relatively passive force. Unlike in Ukraine, where Russian troops face a combat-experienced army that despises Russia, and this difference in morale cannot be underestimated. More importantly, in the Russo-Ukrainian War, Ukraine has a wide land border with Europe through which large-scale weapons and ammunition can easily flow. Conversely, Taiwan would be isolated soon after the start of the war. China will likely establish a naval blockade at the start of the conflict. Any supplies of military supplies must be transported by ships or by air. Both could be attacked by Beijing, which is only 100 miles off the coast of Taiwan. Therefore, the tension between Taiwan and China should be ended as soon as possible, and an environment of peace should be established for the two brotherly nations. While the effects of the Ukraine war may have affected the whole world, the cost of a second war may be heavy for the whole world. War is the biggest problem of a country. It is a matter of life and death. It is the way of survival or destruction. It cannot be done without scrutiny. These words of the famous philosopher Sun Tzu are one of the sentences that best summarize the current course of the Ukrainian war. In 2022, when the war began, Russian President Vladimir Putin gave a 2-week time frame in his forecast for the war. But when we look at the past year, we can say that the Ukraine war has progressed far beyond Putin's predictions, especially recently. Nothing is going the way Putin wants in Bakhmut. Unfortunately, Russian President Putin underestimated the Ukrainian army when Crimea was annexed in 2014, He thought that they would remain silent as the whole world was silent, and he quickly sent his army inside the Ukrainian border without preparing it well. But at this point, Putin's hasty attitude has brought the Russian army to the brink of collapse. The Russian army, which was not properly armed and did not have sufficient plans, did not experience any tangible war gains, although it continued to exist in 4 important regions of Ukraine. This, of course, has done a lot of damage to the Russian economy and Putin's popularity in the country. After the war started, Russia, which was subjected to economic sanctions by the whole world, came to the brink of bankruptcy with the heavy economic burden of the war. Although Putin tries to take economic measures in his own way, we see that these measures do not provide any benefit. At this point, the Russian president has to offer a war win to one of his people, at least to regain his popularity at home. With the partial mobilization decision announced last autumn, the impact of the war on the Russian people has become very negative, and this situation will not improve without giving them a win. Putin and the Russian army have long focused on one place for this achievement. The city of Bakhmut of the Donetsk Oblast was the place where the heaviest clashes of the war took place. The armies of the 2 countries are fighting fiercely here. The Ukrainian army successfully dodges the Russian attacks here, causing the Russian army to suffer huge losses. The Russian army, on the other hand, cannot pass the steel curtain of the Ukrainian defense despite all its efforts. So why does Russia want Bakhmut? Russia has explained for the first time why for months it has flocked its troops to seize the industrial city of Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk region. If Bakhmut falls, the Russian armed forces will be able to advance into Ukraine. Bakhmut has witnessed some of the most intense fighting in Russia's Ukraine war that began last February. Clashes between Russian and Ukrainian forces are escalating fiercely as Moscow seeks its first major combat victory since the summer of 2022. Moreover, the Wagner Group, founded by Vladimir Putin's ally, Yevgeny Prigozhin, was heavily involved in Russia's Bakhmut offensive alongside conventional Russian troops. Russian officials state that Bakhmut is an important defense center of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Donbas region. The city acts as a regional hub with highways to strategic cities in the Donbas, such as Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. The containment of Bakhmut will allow further offensive actions for the Russian army deeper into the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine. But Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has made it clear that his troops will not withdraw from the city. Zelensky's senior commanders suggested to him not to retreat and instead strengthen the city's defenses. The command unanimously supported this position, and the Ukrainian chief of staff was ordered to find suitable forces to assist the troops in Bakhmut. Ukraine's Interior Ministry also outlined the importance of Bakhmut remaining under Ukrainian control. Bakhmut is a living wall that allows the Ukrainian troops not to hold back from the war. Successful defense of the city could put the Ukrainians in a position to launch a counterattack. The Russian army has lost a tremendous amount of people and equipment in this direction. They have been trying to seize Bakhmut for months and have been unsuccessful. Bakhmut has great symbolic value for Russia. There, the situation is the most complicated at the moment, but the Ukrainian defense stands strong and performs combat missions. Many analysts said that while Bakhmut himself may have little strategic value, Russia would use the city as a stepping stone to one of its stated war objectives. Capturing the entire Donbas region and the Russian capture of Bakhmut would determine the course of the war. Unless Bakhmut is taken, it is impossible for the Russian military to achieve Putin's war goals in Ukraine. There is no way to take Donbas without taking Bakhmut, and taking Donbas is one of the main tasks of the Russian military operation. So what is the situation in Bakhmut right now? At the last point, the Ukrainian forces hold an important route in and out of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region. The corresponding statement was made by Deputy Commander of the Svoboda Battalion National Guard Lieutenant Vladimir Nazarenko. The armed forces of Ukraine hold the Bakhmut-Kostyantynivka highway and conduct a fairly stable defense. The situation around Bakhmut and its suburbs is very infernal as it is on the entire eastern front. The Bakhmut-Kostyantynivka highway is a very important route to transport supplies to the city, and the Ukrainian presence there has prevented any possible Russian supplies. There have been no tactical changes on the Ukrainian side, and the Ukrainian army is holding the defense. On the other hand, they look for weakness in the Russian army, try to distract the Ukrainian forces by fighting, withdraw their reserves, try to combine different methods and tactics, but fail in such efforts. Increasing claims about the possible withdrawal of Ukraine from the city also do not reflect the truth. There is no retreat. On the contrary, some new reserve Ukrainian troops are arriving as reinforcements to hold the defense. The entire battlefield is under a chaotic bombardment, but the Ukrainian army remains in contact with the city. There are uncut roads. This situation, of course, has put the Bakhmut war into a very difficult process for Russia. But for Russia, Bakhmut has become a matter of honor. So what happens if Russia captures Bakhmut? Bakhmut is not just a simple city. It is part of a heavily fortified defensive line, a city with long underground tunnels and walls. That's why the Russian army's capture of this castle seems quite difficult in the current state. The fall of Bakhmut will allow it to reach other settlements in the Donetsk region after Bakhmut. The Russian army could attack cities such as Kramatorsk and Sloviansk after Bakhmut. The road to other Ukrainian towns in the direction of Donetsk becomes clear for the Russians. And that's why the Ukrainian army has set up an unprecedented defense line in Bakhmut. Russian officials claim that Russia currently controls the entire eastern part of Bakhmut, but the Ukrainian chief of staff argues the opposite. Well, isn't there another place that Russia seizes again and wants to take besides Bakhmut? It was alleged that Russia could risk launching a new attack on the city of Volodar in the Donetsk region in eastern Ukraine. Until recently, the Russian command saw a breakthrough in Volodar as a key way to achieve an operationally significant breakthrough on the Ukrainian battlefield. Volodar witnessed intense fighting in January and February as Russian troops tried to seize the town. The capture of Volodar strengthened the possibility that the war could turn in Moscow's favor. But the Ukrainian army inflicted the loss of dozens of armored vehicles and soldiers on the Russian army in an unsuccessful attempt by Russian forces to capture the eastern Ukrainian town. Russian planners will likely face the dilemma of attempting another Volodar offensive or supporting intense fighting further north near Bakhmut and Kreminna. Volodar could have been a new, very important acquisition for the Russian army at that time. Taking control of this settlement would have given Russian troops access to the Krasnoarmeysk-Kakhovskaya directions. But the Russian attack on Volodar was reportedly stopped by the end of the first week of February. As in the sentence we quoted you at the beginning, Russian President Putin apparently started the war without scrutinizing it. There is no other explanation for the fact that the Russian army suffered such heavy losses and could not make any gains despite being the attacking party. It is difficult to know how this war, which left its mark on the 21st century, will end at the moment, but it seems that in the end it is already clear who will lose everything. Though there are a lot of updates from the Donetsk region here, Russian forces attempted to resume their attacks on Volodar. They prepared an assault unit and launched an attack to get a foothold in the village in front of the city. But because Ukrainians extensively used DRAM projectiles to mine the area, Russian armor exploded, never reaching the predetermined destination, exposing the infantry to fire. Last time I told you that the Russian command decided to replace the Marine Brigade due to the extensive combat losses and poor morale and started relocating forces through Volnovakha and Mariupol. I also told you that Ukrainians conducted a series of HIMARS strikes targeting the means of transportation as well as areas of forces concentrations. The freshest report suggests that this preventative actions gave results because Russian forces are still engaged in the degraded marine detachments for conducting assaults in the Volodar area. Simultaneously, some Russian sources started circulating a staged video featuring the Marines who basically said that they would continue to fight until they achieved their objectives. When it comes to the unstaged war footage, it shows that Russian Marines from the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade suffer another defeat in yet another assault on the eastern hamlet. The main objective was to breach the primary line of defense and re-establish positions in the first several blocks. The ability of Russians to maintain their positions in these ruins is highly doubtful because both parties shelled this region so heavily that there are only ashes left. In any case, the Marines didn't even get close to the village because they got on a mine. British intelligence reported that Russian advances in this region have slowed down significantly because Ukrainians have successfully adopted remote anti-armor mine systems, or RAM. RAM is a specialist artillery shell that scatters anti-armor mines up to 17 kilometers away from the firing unit. They noted that Ukrainians are not only launching mines in front of the attackers, but also behind them, which causes disarray when they retreat or just move through the areas that they control. It looks like the Marines in the video tripped exactly this type of mine because they were still far away from Ukrainian positions and were spotted by a Russian drone operator who requested support. Russian military analysts critiqued the inadequate preparation for the assaults. They said that almost all unsuccessful Russian attacks here have been caused by explosions of mines. So a continuous lack of engineer reconnaissance in the Volodar area is unthinkable. As a result, the Russian attack failed. The infantry that the vehicle was providing cover had to retreat, and everyone inside the vehicle immediately died. Apart from the gunner who managed to get out of the burning vehicle and get to several troops, they decided to hide in the trenches. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense recently posted an image reportedly of a Russian diary found near Volodar that shows huge losses during Russian assaults in the area. The diary details that during assaults over the course of 4 days, only 57 out of the 434 Russian soldiers sent into the battle survived, which is just over 13% survival rate. The latest reports from Ukrainian intelligence suggest that Russian forces started summoning recently wounded soldiers and telling them that they would refill the separate 37th Motorized Infantry Brigade for unspecified offensive actions during the last week of March. Overall, the Ukrainian emphasis on mining the approach us to Volodar, combined with the continuous failure of Russian forces to implement sound mine-clearing practices, led to extensive losses and inadvertent culmination of the Russian offensive operation. Timely HIMARS strikes on the crucial areas of forces concentrations ensured amplifications of the problems with the replenishment of the reserves, to the extent that Russians started calling up wounded personnel to plug holes in the front.